Greetings, everyone, and thanks a lot for joining us once again on this episode of the development context of sovereign credit ratings. This podcast is brought to you by Africa Catalysts in partnership with UNDP as part of the Africa Credit Ratings Initiative. And what we do is try to understand credit ratings deeply and how they affect development, but also, most importantly, countries' abilities to access financing. On this episode, we specifically want to talk about the role of Africa Credit Rating Agency in reshaping sovereign credit ratings. What extent this is feasible and what would be the immediate policy reforms we need to see, and so much more, especially where the starting point is in this entire conversation. Some of the things we really want to unpack. And I'm extremely privileged to have Dr. Misheck Mutize, who is the lead expert and country support on rating agencies at the African Union's APRM. Dr. Misheck, it's really great to have you on the show today.
Oh, thank you very much. I'm very glad to be here.
It's been a long time coming podcast, so I'm happy to be sitting with you. And I just want to give our listeners context that the Africa Credit Ratings Agency is also coming at a time when countries are really grappling with challenges of international credit rating agencies. And we talk about the big three and how they're really not fair. But I think that conversation is now put aside. We've moved on to what could be the solutions and policy reforms that we see. The other point to also note is Dr. Misheck plays a very critical role in the progress of the establishment of the agency and supporting countries in shaping their independent data analysis and information reflecting their unique economic realities. In the past few, months, we've had the opportunity to collaborate with APRM. And Dr. Misheck, you've been on ground. What are some of the things you've observed, especially with interacting with countries in terms of how they're approaching their credit ratings?
Well, I think it's very important that we're having this discussion at this particular time where we have very practical knowledge about what is going on and also what needs to change. So that's a very good starting point, that these issues that you are asking about now will not be addressed by having an Africa Credit Rating Agency. So interacting with our member states, we have seen one very big shortfall in capacity. I think the initiative that you are working on is very, very timely to capacitate our member states to be able to engage with the rating agencies. So, for instance, I'll tell you what we have experienced over the past few years. Severally, because we do interact with the analysts who pronounce these ratings. They've reached out to us, which I think was a very noble strategy, that they've been trying to reach representatives of governments to verify data, to verify some of the qualitative information that they input into the rating process. But they seem kind to be able to pinpoint who to speak to, who has authority to confirm and represent government, which is a very concerning basic component that we need to have in place. You find at a very high political level a reaction when a rating goes the wrong way. But a simple thing like having a representative in the Ministry of Finance or in the central bank to speak on behalf of government, it has not been happening. So we have found it important to always, make these suggestions and encourage our governments to put a framework to institutionalize the function of engaging with credit rating agencies, so that within the Ministry of Finance and Planning, there is 2 or 3 people who are experts, custodian of the engagement or maintaining the relationship with analysts who do these ratings. Because if that function is not there, analysts will just read media statements, media publication. They will make their own assumptions because they are not getting the feedback from government at a timely, in a timely manner.
So, I mean, it's one question to say that I'm glad you started with that. So, that's one gap that you see the Africa Credit Rating Agency feel in this particular case. It's not that we're just going to be your agency, but we will start with giving you the, representing and giving you that support in terms of, is this a role you see taking on?
Well, to readjust that thinking a little bit, that role need to reside with government. Government needs to have ownership of the information and data that is inputted in the rating process. So the Africa Credit Rating Agency, obviously, we expect it to have a much stronger edge in accessing most of the data that maybe the international rating agencies are not able to access by virtue of proximity. And also that since we in the African Union are also trying to consolidate the need to have an institutionalized framework to engage with rating agencies, have experts in the Ministry of Finance to make this data readily available, because in many cases the data is available, but it's not properly processed and published on time in public platforms like the websites for Ministry of Finance and central bank, so that the stakeholders can access this data in real time.
Yeah. One of the things, Meshek, that a lot of people could bring to the table would be the credibility, and also having a rating agency, an African credit rating agency now, and you've had these big three for ages. It's a question of to what extent can investors really trust, this agency. And I just want to bring you in. I personally was really impressed by the fact that APRM put out a statement when Fitch downgraded AFCRA. And I just want to read it out. You said the Africa peer review mechanism disagrees with Fitch's ratings misclassification of AFRIXIM Bank. Did this, from your analysis, hold any water with the rating agency? Did you see your role asserted, for example, at this particular point? And in that way, does it give you confidence that we're on the right track?
Absolutely. I think we have been in the credit rating industry for some time now to be objective in our views. So this is not the first time that we are objecting a rating on behalf of our African institutions and sovereigns. We have done so, I think, mid last year when we disagreed with Moody's on its rating of Kenya, which we thought was based on euphoria around the social protest, not around the specific fundamentals that underpinned the rating process. So we were proven right because Moody's then upgraded the outlook of Kenya 6 months down the line, which we thought was not an accurate reflection of that particular environment. So that's clearly stated. And we are saying that these are some of the components that explains why maybe having an alternative rating agency will make a case for investors to consider the value addition in its opinions.
Yeah. Thanks, Misheck, clearly for giving us a broader perspective of that. And for me, what it brings to mind is, it's a way to find a way how the Africa Credit Rating Agency can work closely with the already established rating agencies. Because even from this own perspective of, for example, rejecting some of their findings or their report, you can clearly tell some of the challenges, the risks. From where you sit with the AFCRA, what are some of the major challenges that you foresee and probably will need to prepare for in the market as you work towards supporting countries?
Well, I think it's important to outline that in Africa, a rating agency is not established to give favorable ratings to African countries or entities. Otherwise, there will be no purpose to establish this institution because investors will not believe anything else it is going to say. So, effect or the purpose and objective of establishing this institution is to give more accurate perspectives to investors who have exposures in Africa.
So it's not to replace the already existing big three, but it's to add and support governments. Just help me clearly demonstrate, because maybe it's very important for us also, those listening in, to really understand the core purpose of the institution.
Well, it's impossible to replace the big three. Those institutions established their own market space as a function of time. And also it serve a specific market. If you care to know, it is the Eurobond market where money is invested through financial instruments in foreign currency. But an ecosystem that an Africa credit rating agency is going to make an impact is in the domestic financial market in many different fronts, because there is a vast portfolio of corporates that have a lot of capacity to pierce through the sovereign ceiling. In other words, to be rated higher than sovereigns. But they have not been able to access ratings because of cost and also because of lack of interest to tap into the financial, into the foreign currency financial market. So we see one of the main target market. To the sovereign rating, of course, it will be an anchor rating for investors who are moving money into the corporate and sub-sovereign space. But we believe that this rating agency have a very strong market a portfolio to cover, which is not directly competing with the big three rating agencies, but rather to some extent perhaps collaborate on knowledge sharing.
What kind of support from both African governments and private sector, policymakers, financial institutions, or businesses do you see the agency or African credit rating agency need to ensure that it thrives and be able to execute its role effectively?
I think it's most important rating education. There is no rating teacher in Africa.
Wow.
Most of us don't see the more value of ratings beyond access to financial markets. It's a very important instrument for transparency, even if you are not tapping in financial markets. So that's why you see that in most of the engagements we have, we start with basic ratings education so that financial market understand that this is a key component to instill confidence in financial markets.
Yeah.
Be it domestic investors or international investors. Yeah.
Yeah. Misheck, I really want to ask something very key for me. Away from credit ratings, and I would like for us to look beyond that. For a policymaker probably listening to this kind of podcast where we're saying we need policy support, etc., and government support to really understand, just give us that perspective on beyond numbers on credit ratings and how it actually impacts development and any ordinary person that might be listening to this podcast.
Okay. I've got a piece that I put out a few days ago on it's always a very interesting and fascinating analysis that Eurobonds that our governments are using to borrow money to finance the fees, they are oversubscribed all the issuances, I think we have had over 75 issuances combined amongst all the 21 African countries that have issued bonds. So what it means is when these bonds are oversubscribed, it means that there is excessive demand more than the supply. And you see that the trend of all new Eurobond issuances is that the interest rate is slightly increasing. So the average amongst the Eurobonds issued around 2006 is around 6%, 6.5. And if you see the latest issuances now, the interest rates is around 10 or 11%. So you ask your simple question on why are these bonds allowed to be oversubscribed when the interest rate is still high? Why can't we live on this demand to reduce the interest? And of course, we can blame rating agencies for that, for exaggerating risk, but there are so many factors that we could influence also to reduce the interest. Of course, it means when there is more interest to pay, it increases the debt burden of government. And also it means funding available for other investments in education, health, and socio-economic sectors is less and less. So that's one of the very interesting angle that you see the impact of these inputs into the borrowing space have got a very direct consequence on the obligations for government.
That's a very good perspective. And at the end of the day, with those implications also is affecting your cost of living. So this is how you end up paying for more for the products, Misheck. So for me, I think it's a very technical conversation. And that's why sometimes I'm like, let's just bring it down to really the people or even the leaders to really understand that behind the numbers and the metrics and methodologies lies livelihoods, people that actually really want to afford a good quality of life, to afford, good education and healthcare and etc. I think one of the questions I want to leave you with is, we've heard of the launch of the agency. We've engaged in multiple conversations on knowledge sharing and capacity building. What next now?
Well, I always try to create an impression that it's not, remember, credit ratings are not an end in themselves. The reason why we talk credit ratings is because of financing development in Africa or in the developing world. So a credit rating is important to influence or to determine the risk and return of capital. Credit rating agency that we are working on is part of the financing for development ecosystem in Africa, the African financial architecture, which also encompasses other financial sector players that have the same agenda. So this is an ecosystem that we need to instill more confidence so that Africa Rating Agency will also come to the same field where there is some level of trust. That's why maybe you have seen that we have been quite strong in defending the position of African multilaterals, because if we discredit these institutions, we are not only discrediting one institution, we are destabilizing the foundations of the whole architecture financing Africa and, perception of risk. So we are hoping that it will be not very difficult, given where we are now, to bring this institution into the market. The most difficult part was to design it in the fact that in the way that it will be able to stand the test of time and the scrutiny that will come after we have introduced this entity to the market. Remember, there are a lot more people who may be interested in this project to fail than they are who are supporting this project to succeed.
I hope not, Misheck, but thank you so much for having the time to speak to us. I know we'll be back on the podcast, obviously. I just feel like we haven't had as much time to really explore the conversation the way I think we need to bring it to the people. But I think for me, this is a good start to really understand the work of the African Credit Rating Agencies, but also APRM and the amount of efforts that have been put in supporting governments, in supporting countries and analysts and institutions within Africa navigate rating agencies. Misheck, thank you so much for making the time.
Thank you very much, Maggie, for having me.
I know. And for the listeners, thanks a lot. We'll be back here with another episode on the development context of sovereign credit ratings. Have a very wonderful evening, morning, and afternoon.